My fiancée thought she would surprise me by having my toxic parents in the front row on my wedding day, but I surprised her with a wedding cancellation instead. I was engaged and planned to marry my fiancée in a week. We had been together for 4 years, and I proposed to her because I believed that with her I could finally have a real family. We come from very different family backgrounds. I come from a broken family. My parents struggled with drug addiction and were too young and immature when they had me. They had no money, no stability, and not even a real desire to be parents. To this day, I still don't know why they even had me. When I was still very young, my mother surrendered me to the foster care system. That stage of my life was extremely difficult. I was moved from house to house many times, and in many of those places I didn't feel safe or loved. Other children bullied me, and sometimes even the people responsible for my care hurt me. I spent many of those years feeling lonely, scared, and unsure of whom I could trust. After a few years, something unexpected happened. My parents suddenly decided they wanted me back. They had supposedly turned their lives around, or so it seemed at least on the surface. They told me they were no longer using drugs and were trying to live differently. I wasn't sure how to feel. Part of me had longed for that for a long time, to be wanted to have a real family. But another part of me felt confused and hurt. They hadn't been there when I needed them most. I had gone through so much alone, and then suddenly they reappeared saying they were ready now. It felt like the best lie for a child who had never had a real family. At that moment, they offered no genuine apology. We never had any conversations about everything that happened in the past, like leaving me in foster care. They just said they weren't ready before, but now they were. And that was it. I felt like they wanted to move forward without acknowledging the past. But since no one had adopted me while I was in the system, I didn't have many options, so I ended up moving back in with them. It was strange returning to people who were supposed to be my parents, but still felt like strangers in many ways. You'd think that after all those years they abandoned me after everything I went through without them, they would return with more kindness, more care, or at least more understanding. But that wasn't the case. Instead of trying to repair the damage or acknowledge the pain they caused, they acted as if nothing had happened, as if we could pick up where we left off, pretending we were a big, happy family. They never asked me what my life had been like while they were absent. They didn't want to talk about foster homes, bullying, or loneliness. They didn't want to hear about the pain of feeling forgotten and unloved. Instead, they acted as if ignoring the past would be enough to make everything okay. But for me, it wasn't that simple. I couldn't pretend. I have scars from those years, some visible and others deeply buried. And their decision to gloss over all of it only made the pain way heavier. My parents used to comment on how much I had changed since they last saw me, as if it were a huge surprise. They said it in a tone that felt more like a complaint than a simple observation, as if they expected me to still be the same little boy they had left behind despite everything I had lived through. It was as if they couldn't or wouldn't understand that being in the system, being moved from place to place, being bullied and hurt, would obviously have an effect on me. How could I not change? But they acted as if none of that mattered. They wanted me to smile, to be cheerful, to act as if we were a normal family resuming our life together. They expected me to be a normal, happy child, as if I hadn't had to go through a very different childhood from what a normal child would experience. I carried so much anger, sadness, and confusion, but there was no space to express any of it. I had to suppress everything just to maintain peace in a house, because despite how bad it was, going back to what was before would be much worse. And it was worse because despite everything I'm about to tell you, the foster care system was much worse, which didn't make my parents' house much better. If I didn't do well, whether in school with chores or simply by not behaving as my father wanted, he would punish me harshly. Sometimes he would hit my hands with a cane, other times he would send me to bed without dinner, as if withholding food was another way to control me. These weren't simple punishments. They were ways to use my trauma to control me. I always walked on eggshells around him, never knowing what might set him off, but as I said, it was still better than the foster care system. What hurt as much as that, or even more, was that my mother never intervened to protect me. She stood by and said nothing, as if she wasn't really there. She was my mother, and I hoped that someday she would speak up for me, tell him to stop, or even hug me afterward. But that never happened. She remained silent and didn't act like mothers on TV. I tried so hard to be good enough to avoid punishments also, because I didn't want to go back to where I was before, and instead, I felt like I was always failing at something, always one step away from making a mistake that would earn me a beating or something similar. So as you can imagine, my childhood was hell. When I turned 18, I no longer needed to live with my parents. I had tried to escape a couple of times, but they always threatened to send me back to the foster care system. So living on my own as a minor wasn't a possibility. I was completely fed up with my parents and everything that came with living under their roof. I wanted to leave, I didn't care where. I just needed to get away from them, from the shouting, the punishments, and that constant feeling of not belonging. At the same time, their marriage was falling apart. It was as if the rage they used to direct at me was now directed at each other. They fought constantly ugly and scandalous arguments that sometimes lasted for hours. They yelled at each other about money, loyalties, past mistakes. There was no peace in that house, not for a minute. The walls were thin, and everyone around us could hear what was happening. More than once, neighbors had to call the police because the shouting got out of control. Seeing officers appear at the door while people watched us from their windows was humiliating and painful. It angered me that I was constantly put in situations where everyone judged our family. When it was time for college, my parents simply assumed I would stay close to home. They expected me to choose a nearby school to continue helping out running errands, doing chores, and taking care of things around the house. They were getting older, and instead of encouraging me to pursue new opportunities or build my own life, they wanted me to stay as a kind of backup caregiver. But I had other plans. Plans they didn't know about and wouldn't have supported even if they did. I made a very deliberate decision to apply to universities that were far away. I wanted as much distance as possible. I needed space, not just physical, but also emotional and mental. Fortunately, I got a scholarship which changed everything, and thanks to that, I didn't need to depend on them financially, nor did I have to account for myself to them. And to be honest, they never had a fund for my studies or savings for me. It's not like I was walking away from support they had prepared. They didn't plan my future. They only planned to keep me in theirs on their terms. When my parents found out I was going so far away for college, they completely lost control. They didn't take it well at all. My mother cried and begged me to stay. Yes, the same mother who allowed her husband to treat me very badly and never acted like a mother. But when I was leaving and thought of abandoning them, she was the poor mother whose only son was abandoning her. My father, on the other hand, got angry. Luckily, by then I was a bit older and his physical intimidations didn't affect me as much. Neither of them seemed to care that I had worked hard, that I had won a scholarship, or that I was going to college, which is an achievement in itself. They only saw that I was escaping their control. I just packed my bags in silence. I didn't say goodbye because I knew what would happen and I left. They still called the police to come look for me. But when I told them I was 18 and had gone to college, they simply didn't pay much attention. The police only contacted me to see if I was okay because they had apparently been told I might be seriously injured and they conducted a welfare check. While at university, I found a part-time job to support myself. The scholarship covered tuition but not food and housing. I couldn't afford much, but at the same time, a big box was a better place than being in my parents' house, not to mention the foster care system. For the first time, I was earning my own money. Money I could use for food, books, rent, or simply to feel a little more secure. But when my parents found out I had a job at university and was earning money, they started meddling again. They constantly bothered me calling or texting to ask for money. Sometimes they didn't even ask. They demanded it. And when I blocked them, they crossed the line. They even showed up at my university unannounced, trying to manipulate me with guilt or pressure me into giving them my savings, which wasn't even much. It was the little I had left after working and paying for things. The only way I truly managed to keep them away wasn't words. It was threats of a restraining order against them, and also the possibility of suing them for harassment and anything else I could invent. I had no idea if I could get an order or sue them. But they had even less idea, and I thought they would believe me more for going to university or something like that. That made things calm down pretty quickly, and I didn't have to be bothered by them anymore. I went to therapy for my parents, my childhood experiences, and my university stress, and I focused on my studies and my job. By the time I graduated, I hadn't seen or spoken to my parents in a long time, and it was the best feeling in the world. Over time, I met my fiancée. She came from a completely opposite family background with a childhood you could call normal. Everyone in her family loves and accepts each other. I don't think I've ever witnessed a dysfunctional situation with them. They have arguments, but nothing beyond normal disagreements. I also have to say that her parents accepted me as one of their own and gave me a kind of family I never had. However, there was one constant issue between my fiancée and me. She has always expressed her desire to meet my parents and wants to have a relationship with them. No matter how many times I've told her how traumatic it was growing up with them, she has always pressured me to forgive and reconcile, something I have flatly refused to do. She doesn't have the censored, summarized version of the foster care system and my parents. She has the full version. She knows the most graphic and harsh details, but still thinks they can't be that bad, and that in the end, they are a father and a mother, so they must have enough love to change. That's why she at least wants to meet them. I have refused to open that door again. I always hoped, perhaps even took for granted, that over time she would drop the subject. I thought she would eventually understand that it's not simply a family argument, but today, everything changed. I had arrived home after a long, exhausting day at work. I entered quietly, not expecting anything out of the ordinary. As I walked in, I heard voices coming from the kitchen. My fiancée and her best friend were talking. They didn't hear me come in. I heard my fiancée tell her best friend that she had gone looking for my parents behind my back. Not only had she found them, she had actually gone to see them without telling me. And apparently she also decided on her own to invite them to our wedding as a surprise. It was a complete surprise because I was going to find out on my wedding day in the worst possible way, although for her, it was going to be very good. My fiancée spoke with enthusiasm, saying she couldn't wait to see my face when I saw my parents sitting in the front row on our wedding day. Her best friend luckily intervened, and at that moment I was more grateful to her than I could ever express. She didn't just go along with it as if it were an innocent surprise because she knew part of the story. Instead, she pointed out exactly why it was a bad idea. She told my fiancée firmly and bluntly that what she was doing could go very wrong. She told her it was wrong to do something like that behind my back, that if I didn't want to see my parents, it was for a genuine reason. The best friend told my fiancée that she should have respected my wishes because if she did this in the middle of the wedding, it would be like starting off on the wrong foot, or much worse. But instead of listening to her friend's warning or rethinking this plan that only she wanted, my fiancée began to defend the idea even more. She started defending her actions, saying that since she was going to be my wife, she had the right to make certain decisions about what was best for me. She said she believed it would be good for me to reconnect with my parents, and that somehow it would help me heal, and that it was also fair for her to enter a marriage with someone who had a healthy relationship with their parents. Otherwise, she didn't know how I could be a good father to our future children. She also told her friend that I had just been exaggerating all this time, and that she didn't think my parents were really that bad after getting to know them better. Despite everything I had told her about my childhood, she thought that because she saw them for a couple of hours or whatever, they were sweet people. And she continued saying that I was an adult man now, and it was time to move on and reconcile with my parents. She did exactly what I begged her not to do. She let them back in, and she couldn't connect with that. She didn't just have a conversation with them, she planned to bring them to our wedding. After hearing all that, I didn't want to cause a scene. I didn't want my fiancée or her friend to know I had been listening. So without making a sound, I quietly left the house. I needed to get away to create some space between us because I was about to explode. I thought about going for a walk, but if I left the car in the driveway, it would be very suspicious when they saw it. When I finally returned home several hours later, my fiancée didn't ask me where I had been and acted normal. She was smiling, chatting, behaving as always, but I couldn't pretend. I couldn't even talk to her. I apologized and went up to rest, but resting isn't an option when it's 3 a.m., and I'm still thinking about this. I keep thinking that I don't want to get married now because she can't accept that part of me. Something so bad that it compares to forbidding her from seeing her parents after our wedding. I would never do that because I know how important they are to her, but she can't understand how important it is for me to have my parents out of my life. I know the wedding is an important event, but my parents are a resounding no. We need to have a very serious conversation with my wife, but now is not the time, and that's why I'm writing here. Update 1. We finally managed to sit down and talk with my fiancée about what I had heard. I looked her directly in the eyes and told her honestly that I had overheard her conversation with her best friend, the part where she admitted she had looked for my parents and invited them to the wedding. I wasn't going to start a conversation by telling her how she was lying to me. I made it very clear that I did not want my parents there. I explained again exactly why I didn't want them there and why I had cut them out of my life. Things she already knew. I just refreshed her memory. This wasn't a simple whim or a show of stubbornness. It was a boundary that I needed her to respect, especially since it affected one of the most important days of my life. She tried to argue with me. She said it wasn't her intention to act behind my back and that her intentions were good. She told me that since we were going to get married and she would be my wife, she felt she had the right to know the people who raised me. To her, it was as if she was authorized to access that part of my life, but I couldn't accept that. I told her that being my wife didn't give her the right to make decisions for me without consulting me first, especially decisions that touched on my past and my pain. I needed her to understand that they were no longer a part of my life and that she was not authorized to access it. It was then that my fiancé told me that my parents didn't seem so bad and that they denied having done many of the things I said. She explained that she had spoken with them personally, and although they admitted not being the best parents now, they seemed different, more thoughtful, more mature, and genuinely remorseful. She insisted that they had changed, that I just had to see them with my own eyes. But this is the thing. I already saw and heard with my own senses that they had changed, which was a bullshit and fucking lie. She talked about how time changes people, how the past shouldn't define the future, and how giving them this opportunity would allow me to prove it, that I wouldn't regret it. She told me that they missed me, that they missed their son, and that they were really excited to have been invited to the wedding. And as she spoke, I could see that she truly believed what she was saying. Besides, they are skilled manipulators. She even compared them to her own parents by telling me that no parent is perfect and that I was unfairly punishing mine after so many years. The comparison was that her father once wouldn't let her go to a friend's house because they would be unsupervised, and he thought they might have a party there, as if leaving me without food for 2 days or hitting me with a plate was equally good parenting. I sat with her because I truly love her to make her see what was really happening. But instead, she chose to keep defending my parents, and I couldn't take it anymore. I was going to marry her tomorrow, but I have already told her that I will not. Not only because I don't want to marry with my parents there, but because I don't want to marry someone who doesn't respect my boundaries. We're not discussing how many children we want to have, where to live, or those kinds of things where clear communication and compromise are part of a healthy relationship. This is not her business, and she cannot do it because she thinks another person needs to have parents. If my parents had never taken me out of the system today, I would basically be an orphan, and it wouldn't change absolutely anything for her. She is not the person I thought I had fallen in love with, and marrying her would be a terrible mistake. I regret that we didn't get anywhere with the conversation, but it was the last chance to fix this. Update 2. Today was supposed to be my wedding day, and instead it became one of the most difficult and painful days of my life, but also one of the clearest. I barely slept last night. I was awake all night with my mind racing. I cannot marry someone who does not respect my boundaries. I cannot build a future with someone who refuses to listen to me when I talk about my pain, who acts behind my back and invites the very people I've fought so hard to distance myself from without my consent. I cannot be with someone who tells me I am exaggerating when all I am trying to do is protect myself. This wasn't just about my parents. It was about trust, about emotional security, about whether the person I was going to marry truly saw and accepted me completely. Because if she doesn't accept me without parents, then she doesn't accept me as I am and wants me to change before we even get married. My now ex-fiancée still thought canceling the wedding was just a tantrum of mine, but I repeated to her early in the morning that the wedding was completely canceled. She looked at me, shook her head, and told me I had to stop overreacting about our last conversation. She said it was too late to back out. She said she was going to the venue to meet her makeup artist and bridesmaids, and that she expected me to do the same. Then she added that my parents were going to attend whether I liked it or not, and that after the wedding we could talk about the subject again, that perhaps we didn't have to see them all the time. And with that, she left with her dress. Since she wasn't listening to me, I called her parents and told them the wedding was officially canceled. They were surprised and started asking me questions, wanting to know what had happened. So I told them the truth, everything. They didn't take it well at all, and I could tell they thought the same as my ex-fiancée, that I should have parents or I wouldn't be complete, but I informed them that my decision was final. After talking to her parents, I started receiving an avalanche of calls from my ex-fiancée, one after another. When I finally answered, she was screaming on the phone, crying hysterically, letting out everything she felt. She called me a coward for canceling the wedding and said I had humiliated her in front of everyone. Again and again, she screamed that she would never forgive me for what I had done. But then she said something that crossed all boundaries. With venom in her voice, she told me that my parents were right to have abandoned me as a child. She told me I didn't deserve to have anyone in my life, that I was broken, that I was unworthy of love, and that I was destined to be alone. It was cruel and it was intentional. At that moment, I told her I had heard enough. I informed her that I would pack her things and leave them outside for her to pick up, as this is my house and I pay for it. Her name is not on the mortgage. She kept screaming, but I ended the call. Since then, my friends who know my entire situation have been giving me their support, but my ex-fiancée's family thinks I'm wrong. Honestly, I don't care what they think. If they like my parents so much, they can adopt them. I know I made the right decision. If the roles had been reversed, I would never have done to her what she did to me. If she had told me that a part of her past was painful, or that certain people were not safe to have in her life, I would have respected it without question. When she says no to something, I listen. When she expresses discomfort, I take it seriously. That's what love and respect should be. But when it came to me, she didn't offer me the same. She didn't respect my boundaries, so it's over. Update 3. I don't have much to update you on my life because after all that happened, I have definitely broken up with my ex-fiancée. She came to pick up her things a week later, and we didn't say a single word. She just took her belongings and left. For me, that's fine because there wasn't much more to say. I know she was angry about the wedding cancellation, but it's not like she left me any other option after what she did with my parents. But speaking of demons in human form, my parents were not notified that the wedding was canceled. Amidst all the problems related to the cancellation, they were forgotten, and they showed up at the venue anyway. When they arrived and were not allowed in because there was indeed no wedding, they thought it was an excuse I had invented to prevent them from entering, although there certainly was no wedding. I don't know if they called my ex first and she didn't want to answer out of anger, or if they called me directly from the venue, but they wanted to know what to do with them. I told them that if they didn't want to leave, they could call the police. And so it happened, especially because they tried to sneak into the venue, which is completely illegal. So charges were filed. They weren't serious charges, but my parents called my ex to ask her to come help them. And my ex replied that since she was no longer marrying me, they were no longer part of her family either, and it wasn't her problem. I know this because after she told her parents, they called me to tell me to take care of my own, that they already had enough problems paying for a wedding that I had decided to cancel. When I replied, "They are not my parents. I didn't cause this problem, and the person who decided to cancel this wedding was your daughter when she did what she did," they hung up on me. Although not before threatening that their lawyers would contact me about this. So far they haven't, and I doubt they have a good case against me. My parents even proved once again to be exactly what I warned they were. And it's not like I hadn't said it from the beginning. Edit. Almost 6 months have passed since that conversation with my ex's parents, and so far I haven't heard from their lawyers.